Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here, and it's such an honor to be with you, Bjarke Ingels, the superstar architect.
Well, it's a real pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Apologies for calling you a superstar, because when I first shared the draft description for our talk, the only thing that your team flagged was the term star architect. But it seems like a label that follows you everywhere. Like Bjarke Ingels Group Big will be 20 years old this year.
Yes.
Yeah, congratulations.
20. Very soon we can order a drink in a bar.
Yeah. So it's grown from a founder to a family, and now with a highly talented multidisciplinary team of over 700, and with like offices and projects around the world. You've attracted very talented, very ambitious and high-profile clients and a growing global fan base. So why is it so important for you to move beyond labels, and what does that mean to lead as an architect?
But I think I think first of all, like the idea of star architect sounds sort of aggressively self-congratulating. And I think it's definitely not what it feels like. And I would say I think architects are like midwives, assisting a client or an organization, a company, an institution, to give birth to what it is about to become. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, it involves a lot more sort of listening and looking and trying to sort of understand and empathize with the needs and desires of the organization or the person that you're working with and working for, mm-hmm. to unleash and materialize their full potential. So even if once in a while we end up creating something that comes into the world with a certain amount of confidence or a certain amount of character, I would say it is less the imposition of our personality onto the project than it is our recognition of the potential in what the institution we're working for, or the company we're working for, or the family we're designing for, in what they could actually become.
Wow. And there's been a rumor that the secret of your success, you actually just explained, is that you are a yes man. You like to say yes to clients, to any demand, to all stakeholders. Is that true?
I mean, it's true in the sense that in 2009 we published our first book, and we called it "Yes is More," and it's because
I hope this is
There you go. There you go. And it was somehow like this idea that one of the great icons of modern architecture, Mies van der Rohe, is not actually the author, but he's often associated with the term "less is more." Mm-hmm. The idea that by eliminating and reducing, you get down to something more essential. But it also, and it's associated with this kind of modernist. Like he's the architect of the Seagram building here on Park Avenue, and all across North America, there's a handful of Seagram-esque Seagram buildings that are designed by Mies van der Rohe. So it also felt a little bit as if he concluded and just kept going with this reduced, extruded rectangular box with a perfectly designed a curtain wall and the best proportioned possible I-beam. And when I started studying architecture, I would sit down at at a family dinner or whatever, like an aunt I hadn't spoken with for a long time would say, like, so Bjarke, what are you doing now? And so like, yeah, I'm studying to become an architect. And she would hear actor, and she would be very interested. And then I would say, no, architect. And then she would be very disinterested. And then the follow-up question would be, so maybe you can explain to me, why are all modern buildings so boring? And I began to realize that there was, and she did have a point, this aunt, or these aunts, that somehow architecture had gone from, when you see old buildings, and when most people go on holidays, they may go to the beach, etc. But then if they want to do something else, they probably end up going to a cathedral or a palace or an art museum, or like a concert hall maybe. And it seems like in the good old days we were making like incredible buildings, and today it's down to utilitarianism and repetition, and I kind of realized that that architecture was suffering a little bit from maybe a kind of lack of desire or lack of ambition to create something extraordinary out of the ordinary everyday life. But then also this idea that people were associating architecture or sort of radicality with, the uncompromising aesthetics, with some kind of saying no, this kind of discriminating and saying like, my uncompromising vision is this, and I don't have space for anything else. And I'm born and raised in Denmark. Denmark is the most equal country in the world. So the distance between the rich and the poor is the shortest economically, and also it's the culture of consensus. Disagreement is almost embarrassing. There's examples of, like, every 2 years, one of the political parties split up into two new political parties because they disagree about some kind of detail, and it's like, no, we can't be the same party anymore. Like, we have to be two different parties. So you have like sort of 15 parties that are all social democrats, but different shades of social democracy. So we thought, like, how can you ever do anything interesting in this kind of culture of consensus? And we thought, maybe since architecture is, I would say, fundamentally the art form of accommodation, that architecture is about accommodating life. And wherever life is going, whatever it needs to do or wants to do, that's what we have to accommodate. So in a way, we have to look and listen and see where life is going, and then we have to, in a way, draw the contours of life. And therefore we thought, maybe there's a way to turn the art of saying yes, the art of inclusion, of accommodation, into something radical. And the best example that I can find is, if you know the game Twister, where you have a floor mat and you have to place your hands and feet in different positions. And then as the game advances, in the beginning you're just standing in some ordinary pose, boring. But then as the game advances, I hope, it may be such an old example that no one here has any idea what Twister is. But as the game advances, you end up finding yourself with your hands and feet on different parts of the mat, and you'll find yourself with your sort of face rubbing up against the body parts of family members, and it becomes fun and increasingly difficult. And in some way, by committing to saying yes, to not just what you want as the client, but also what the neighbors want, and what the people across the street wants, and what the city wants, and what the environment needs, and what the landscape needs, and what the local flora and fauna would like to have. Like, so by piling on demands, you're actually not making the project more ordinary, you're making it more extreme, like in the game of Twister. And suddenly the design finds itself in backbending shapes, trying to accommodate everybody. And you actually turn pleasing into a radical agenda. And I think that became our way to escape the straitjacket of the extruded box. Simply because the more we said yes to everybody else, the less the conventional extruded box could actually answer the demands. And we ended up having to exceed expectations and exceed the conventions because we had made the project so difficult to solve that only an extraordinary solution could fit it. So in that sense, like this idea of saying yes actually became not the source of compromise, but the path towards a radical solution.
Less is more from Ms. Van Roo is also because of the social context and technology back then, a lot of different parameters. So yes is more your manifesto. Do you think it's also like a zeitgeist of our time or what we need now, this kind of attitude?
Yeah, at least I think we're living in a very complex world, and I think life is always evolving. Darwin has taught us that. And as life evolves, so must the framework or the spaces that we design to accommodate that life. So even though someone designed an amazing public school in 1980, maybe things have changed so radically today that the right answer to the same question today would probably be completely different.
Yeah. Look, this is the last page of this book. He doesn't want to be a star. He didn't want to be a star back then.
Yes, we all have embarrassing moments in our youth.
Wait, the whole book is like a comic style. You mentioned that's like be a comic book. Draw for a comic book is your plan A, and architecture was your plan B, right? How did you transform being stuck in plan B into a global vision for the future?
Yeah, I mean it's true that I'm the middle sibling of three siblings, and I had a sister who was a great musician and singer, and I had a little brother who was a great athlete and poker player, and I was good at drawing, and I think people naturally gravitate towards the path of least resistance. So we all completely ignored any of the things that our siblings were good at. And so when I graduated from high school, I knew that my superpower was to draw.
Wow.
But there was no cartoon academy. So the closest match I could find was that the architecture in Denmark is part of the liberal art school. So you have the Royal Danish Art Academy of painting, sculpture, and architecture. And it seemed like the closest match I could find. And also because education is free in Denmark, the state even pays you a grant to study. I wasn't really committing any kind of huge crimes or like chaos in my future economy, but by wasting a little bit of time getting good at drawing buildings and landscapes, which are essentially the backgrounds in graphic novels, right? So I thought, spend a few years getting very good at drawing the background, and then get back to the main issue of drawing, of creating graphic novels. And like Frank Miller, the American graphic novelist, was a major inspiration. A lot of the Europeans a lot of the Italians and French and Belgians. But then slowly but surely I got increasingly fascinated by the background and fell in love with it. Actually, I think it went wrong the first month of architecture school because we went to Barcelona in 1993. Barcelona had hosted the Olympics in 1992, and it was one of the most modern, most beautiful, most striking cities I've ever been to. They made the most comprehensive city renewal, mostly by surgically eliminating buildings that were about to fall apart. And instead of making a new building, they made a square. And by investing just a little bit of money into making that square beautiful, it increased the value of all of the surrounding real estate. And slowly but surely, with this kind of surgical, almost acupunctural intervention, they had created one of the most flourishing and most beautiful cities in the world. And they had Gaudí. And if anyone has been to any of the Gaudí's buildings, Sagrada Familia, like Parc Güell, it's almost like graphic novels in built form. So the most striking forms, he was sponsored by the Güell family, which is also the name of a lot of his buildings, including the park. And they were ceramic tycoons. So he seemed to have an infinite access to colorful ceramic tiles. So all his buildings are covered in ceramic tiles. And it tends to be when you look under the hood of a lot of these architectural careers, Le Corbusier, the grandfather of modernism, he was friends with Pierre Sanfin. And Sanfin's father was the head of the French cement industry. And all of his projects are about showing how cool concrete is. So if you can find some kind of tycoon, in the case of Gaudí, it was colorful ceramics. And I was just blown away with Casa Batlle, Casa Mila, Sagrada Familia. I was just blown away that architecture could be so cool. I had no idea. I mean, I thought I was, in a way, wasting 2 or 3 years of my life to get good at drawing backgrounds. And I just stumbled upon the fact that architecture could be about creating these amazing worlds. And Parc Güell is this incredible park in the north of Barcelona, up in the hills. And it was meant as some kind of gated community for the wealthy merchants of Barcelona. But in the end, very few buildings were built. And what you have instead is the most stunning man-made landscape, artworks, structural forms that evoke waves and colonnades. And it was just I could not believe that it was possible not only to imagine but also to realize your dream world. And I think that's when it kind of clicked for me that the Danish word for design is formgivning, which means form giving.
Yeah, this is a recent book.
Exactly, we're very consistent in our messaging here. Form giving is because when you're designing something, you're giving form to that which has not yet been given form. In other words, you're giving form to the future, because when you're designing a building or a space, or even an object, you're giving form to the world, a small part of the world, but nonetheless part of the world, that you would like to find yourself living in the future. And once that dawned on me, it sort of became clear to me that architecture is not about style or taste or fashion. It's about what kind of world do we want to live in, and the realization that not only do we have the possibility, we have the responsibility to make it so.
Wow. I was going to ask you, do you have a tycoon that give you unlimited access of materials of our time?
No, it's a good question. I mean,
have more than one.
I've been putting a lot of hopes into graphene, but it's somehow I even invested a little bit of my own money in different kinds of graphene ventures. You know, graphene is the it's the constituent part of graphite. So if you slice graphite in molecular thick, like one molecule thick layers, you get graphene. It's like an hexagonal mesh of carbon binds. And it's a material that, I'm not completely straight on the facts, but I believe it's 200 times more conductive than copper. I think it's 100 times stronger than steel. It's insanely light. 1 gram of it can cover a football field. So it's this material that has magical properties. And it does exist. I just haven't seen it manufactured at scale. But,
so what's the scale now? In the laboratory?
Yes, so I think you can use it for filters, you can use it as a coating. So also when you apply it to steel or when you apply it to other materials, it enhances their properties. But in its purest form, it is space-age polymer. It's the kind of shit, it's like kryptonite. It's adamantium. It's what all the graphic novels. It's the skeleton of Wolverine. It's something that would be epic to work with. And but I think on a more quotidian level, and since you ask about materials, like this year I'm the chief editor of or guest editor of Domus, the Italian architecture, art, and design magazine that is 98 years old. It's turning 100 in 2 years, according to my math. And the last 10 years, they decided to invite a different guest editor every year. Gio Ponti was one of the famous early editors of the magazine, so it's a very honorable path to follow. But for this year, we decided actually to make it a little bit fun for ourselves, to try to see if we could take the term materialism and turn it into a positive. Because people would normally associate it with some kind of cynical consumerism. But fundamentally, you could narrate the story of mankind as a story of the materials we've known to harvest and manipulate to create our society. And for January, we took stone.
Stone. Why you start with stone?
Because, of course, we're cave dwellers. The stone was one of the first fundamental materials. We found caves. We inhabited those caves. We learned how to stack stones. We just wrapped tonight, before coming here, February, which is about Earth. It's also a very fundamental material. It's a material that has the same name that the planet we live on. And again, by ramming Earth, by pasting it, by baking it, we have created the elements. You can say, like in some way, you could say the Roman Empire. Of course, they were very good at military strategy. They inherited a lot of the concepts from Greek civilization. But more than anything, they had the sun-baked clay brick and the Roman arch. And with those two things, they could make the Roman roads, they could make the aqueducts, the viaducts, they could make the entire infrastructure to sustain a city of 1 million people 2,000 years ago. And they could create the supply chain of getting resources to the front lines and also getting resources back from the front lines to the city. So in some way, this kind of materialist perspective allows you a whole new understanding of the evolution of human civilization, and somehow also gives you a refreshing new perspective on architecture. And what we've seen, since you're talking about the materials of the future, both in stone somehow devolved into some kind of luxury. It used to be what you made cathedrals out of, but then it became more and more like a veneer of luxury that you would apply to a wall of steel or concrete. But people in Britain and France have somehow rediscovered stone. And stone, if you harvest it locally, so if you're in a place that has stone, and for like in New York we have bluestone, it's what all of New York is made of. So if you harvest it locally using electrical source, it's practically carbon neutral.
Yes, it's like great passive.
It's extremely passive. And if you take, like the way you make concrete, for instance, is you take a limestone, then you harvest it, you grind it, you pulverize it, you burn it with incredible use of energy. You turn it into an issue that like a powder, like cement that you essentially then mix with some steel and some rubble and blah blah, and then you end up with a material that has 5% of the load-bearing capacity of the original limestone. So after all that work, you have a material that's worse than what you came with. So there's this like renaissance of realizing that we could actually build our buildings out of stone. And also in the absence of the rebar, the steel doesn't corrode, so it has a lot of advantages. But so there is maybe a path back to eliminating the luxury label and then rediscovering stone as something to build with. The same is true for earth. When you build with rammed earth, it's becoming a very sort of architectural heavy conversation now, but when you build with rammed earth, you end up with walls that are not entirely weather or waterproof, but what they do is that they actually absorb humidity very quickly, and they also release it very quickly. So that means that if you have a room made out of rammed earth, humidity levels are very constant, because when it's full of people and they're breathing and sweating, the wall sucks it in, and then when it's incredibly dry, the wall releases it back. So it regulates humidity, temperature, air quality. So already in the first two issues, we're beginning to realize that the people that are at the frontier of going back at rediscovering abandoned or forgotten materials and techniques are finding these incredible attributes and qualities that they are then beginning to build with today, and then they're doing them. And in order to be able to build with these things today, you have to change code again, because code now prefers standard materials that are from the sort of industrial construction complex. So in some way, the journey towards the future is actually to loop a little bit back into the past, rediscover the abandoned techniques and materials, and then start qualifying them to be applied into the future.
Yeah.
So I think in many ways, the answers to the future are really found in the past, and just picking up where they left off, but doing it with the new tools and technologies we have today.
Yeah, I think it's very beautiful. And back to Ms. van der Rohe's less is more. At that time, because of the invention of AC system, air conditioning system, so we kind of allowed that kind of a steel structure or concrete become the main way of constructing, and also this kind of natural intelligence of a natural AC system through storms and earth. We abandoned it because we can use the machine to have more freedom. But now it's in a very sustainable and beautiful way. We go back to the intelligence of nature instead of an artificial system.
Yeah, exactly. Like actually, in the I believe in the late 50s, early 60s, Bernard Rudowski had a beautiful show at MoMA here in New York called Architecture Without Architects. Mm-hmm. It had the subtitle An Introduction to Non-Pedigreed Architecture. And he was talking about vernacular architecture, how architects in the Mediterranean, in Tunisia, had found ways to work with the locally available materials to respond to the local climate in ways that were not academic or aesthetic, but empirical.
Yeah.
So, for instance, like the Greek villages with the white plastered walls that reflect heat and the flat roofs where you can go up and enjoy the evening breeze were examples of a kind of architecture that responded to that particular local climate. Mm. And I always love the term architecture without architects, and I think, continuing what you were talking about, like today I like to talk about engineering without engines. Mm. That we can actually use our sophisticated capacity to calculate and model and simulate to bring the qualities or the attributes of the building back into the building, mm-hmm. instead of being relying on gas-guzzling machinery in the plant room. So by having a wall that absorbs humidity, that regulates temperature, that cleans the air, because of its material, you don't need all the filters and all the AC and all the central heating and all the mechanical ventilation that you otherwise do. So in some way, we could return to buildings where the attribute of the building is really baked into the bones of the building, not relying on all kinds of active mechanical regulation. Mm.
But a lot of interest group will be upset, like electricity companies, oil, gas.
Yeah, like at some point I actually had a fantasy of writing a conspiracy theory novel about how all of the significant architects of the 20th century were somehow assassinated by an interest organization because they were just about to come up with some kind of breakthrough idea. And there's a lot of evidence to sustain this theory because I think Walter White, the designer of the Flatiron, he was killed by a New York millionaire who was jealous that he was supposedly having an affair with his wife Evelyn Nesbit. So he was killed in Madison Square Garden, that he also designed by the client. There was like Le Corbusier, he drowned even though he was an excellent swimmer. Carlo Scarpa, he fell down a staircase. He also designed incredibly complicated staircases. So Aldo Rossi, he had a car accident. Louis Kahn, he was found dead in the men's toilet at Penn Station, poor bastard. And Frank Lloyd Wright, he actually died in bed of age, but his entire family got murdered, and his office was burned down twice. So, and I think I found like 35 significant architects. There was actually an American architect who sleepwalked supposedly out of a window in a building he designed. So in the building they designed? In the building he designed, exactly. So that's why you should never have floor-to-ceiling windows, because... But essentially, I got quite excited about this idea that I felt that I could create a pretty compelling sort of like Da Vinci Code-esque conspiracy theory about how all of the building industry was slowly but surely eliminating the architects when they were at the cusp. Gaudí. He designed, and this is a true story, he designed something called Grand Hotel on the site of the 2 World Trade Center before it was built. And instead of the skyscraper today is essentially a fat core with a perimeter of leasable space. An extruded rectangle with a rectangle inside. Gaudí, of course, being Gaudí, had designed these kind of parabolic pinnacles, not dissimilar to Strata Familia, but like a sort of a bundle of these kind of parabolic stalactites with a crust of rooms, leaving these incredible urban rooms inside, like monumental spaces on the inside, with this inhabitable crust of rooms with views to the outside. Quite different, almost like opposite of a typical skyscraper. Mm-hmm. But and if it would have built, and if it would have been a success, it might completely have changed the urban landscape that we know today. Mm. But he never got to complete it because he was run over by a streetcar and died. So maybe there's a book waiting to be written there. Maybe there's a truth waiting to be uncovered.
Well, we have so many. I have so many things want to talk about, but we promised a very devoted audience to give them a lot of time to ask questions. But I want to go through a little more. Is that okay? Oh, this is the reason why you moved to New York. His building is a residential building that's over there, the only one that doesn't look like a building. Right? And it's like a hybrid of a skyscraper and a courtyard at the heart of the building. This is in Singapore, the second tallest mixed-use tower, pioneering a kind of a vertical urbanism. This is for Google. You make sure they are your friend. They are not going to put you in danger. And this is a factory. It's in Norway. It's a factory and part of a green manufacturing hub outside of Oslo. And this is a very beautiful Denmark's refugee museum. Yeah, I think it's what you've said is really expressed not only the way design shaped how we live, but also how we love and connect with one another. It's very powerful. And we didn't even get into how far is this is your design for NASA's moon mission. How far is that future from us?
I mean, I think it's coming closer and closer. I mean, I think it's within something that feels like relatively this is part of the Olympus project, a design for a base on the moon. The first structure would be a 2,000 square foot structure that could host 4 astronauts for 1 month missions.
So it's not for us.
No, I mean, you could definitely apply.
I thought it's for human civilization.
No, absolutely. But I think there's always a first. So actually, in 2028, as part of the Olympus project, they're going to land a lander with a solar-powered laser sinter 3D printer that can use military-grade lasers to sinter moon dust into a form of obsidian, a sort of, in Game of Thrones, they would call it dragon glass. So a kind of black glass-like rock, obsidian, and that's what this structure is made of. So it has no reinforcement, it has no chemical components, it's simply melted moon dust. 2028, the mission success is to make a sidewalk tile, 2 by 2 feet by 6 inches. But if it passes that test, it unleashes the funding for 2032 construction of a moon base.
Wow.
And we have projects. We're doing the airport of Zurich, the largest timber building on Earth, and its completion date is in 2034. So according to current schedule, there's a building on the moon before the new airport in Zurich.
Yeah, thank you. And this is just an example of how you really find inspiration to blend the responsibility for sustainability with kind of a playful, relate to everyday life.
The steam coming out of that chimney is cleaner than the air of Copenhagen. So that's why the facade is a climbing wall and you can ski on the roof.
This is a power plant turned into a ski slope. Yeah, it's pretty incredible. This 2 photo is beautiful, but the really attractive one of this project is inside the machine, how to turn the waste into energy. This is your old days.
That's an ancient document. Wow.
Yeah.
Hello, sweet pie. I'm really glad you could make it.
That's so funny.
I think we should get straight to business.
Your early days.
Show me what you've got. It's all yours.
Yes, boss. I'm under my...
Københavns nyeste kvarter, Ørestaden, er tænkt som en moderne udgave af Frederiksstaden. En helt ny by opført på bar mark. Og hvor intet er alt muligt, så midt på fælleden er der rig mulighed for at udvikle nye former for arkitektur. Med VM-husene har vi tegnet et tredimensionelt puslespil af lejligheder, og med Boligbjerget har vi bygget en menneskeskabt skråning af villahaver.
So in this video, you are going to introduce this house. Isn't it one of your favorite housing projects, 8 House?
It actually is, I think, one of the things I'm the most proud of. For a lot of different reasons, but one of them is that we were a third into the construction in August 2008 when the subprime economical collapse happened. And our client had the choice, do we just take the hit right now, or do we try to finish it and recover some of the cost? And happily they decided to continue. But of course, at that point, we were a third into the project. We had everything in Denmark is prefabricated, the concrete elements. It's how everything is built there. It's terrible weather and strong unions and labor laws means that you want to do everything offsite and then just put it together like Lego, right? Mm-hmm. So we could not change the project because all the elements had been purchased and most of them had been delivered and a lot of them had been assembled. So the only thing we could change was finishes. So and you know there's a limit to how much you can save. So, but we made the most dirt cheap motherfucking finish you could imagine,
You mean both exterior facade and interior?
Yeah, like, you know, and the interior, it was like, you know, white painted concrete elements and the cheapest timber floors we could find in Poland. But pretty nice, you know, like all of it is quite nice. It has this kind of Scandinavian simplicity to it, and the Danes don't like, you know, red marble anyway. So, but down to the fact that it's very raw. It has visible screws, like all the aluminum facade panels are mounted with visible screws. So like, it's crude as hell, but it's straightforward and it's honest. And what it does is that it creates a man-made mountain village of 350 apartments, 150 townhouses, and where we sort of and some shops and offices and kindergartens and etc. But we exploit the fact that commercial floor plates are deeper than residential floor plates. So we can actually create this kind of townhouse neighborhood on top of the offices that we put on the ground, with little gardens in front and a path. And then we put a layer of apartments, and then we shift the next layer of townhouses, so you still get a little garden in front and a path. And that means that you end up with this kind of community where you can walk and bicycle to the 10th floor. And it has created a community where people know each other. There's actually a quite great film by Ila Becker and Louise Lemoine that moved into the 8 house, or the infinity loop, as we also call it. And the film is called The Infinite Happiness. And they moved in there for 3 weeks, so it's 21 short films in sequence of their experience of living there. And you end up meeting this, there was this woman who moved in there with her husband, and they had a child. Her sister moved in another apartment. They had a child. Then the two sisters' parents moved in a third apartment. Then the first sister got another baby, so they moved to another apartment in the 8 house. And so they end up and it's one of the few places in Copenhagen where people move a lot within the same building, because it has this community. That if you live on the 9th floor, you can actually take your scooter and play with your friend on the 4th floor. You don't have to go down into the courtyard. There is this man-made mountain village in the 3-dimensional space of the city block. So somehow, despite the fact that it had the hardest conception and birth possible, it was realized during the greatest economic crisis in recent years. But despite of all of those superficial downgrades, the bones of the building are doing something that I think are a true testament to the power of architecture, that architecture can actually create connections and community, and it can also do the opposite. And I think this is where we've come the closest, because this building is really dirt cheap. Some friends of mine gave me a great T-shirt that says, if you think good architecture is expensive, try bad architecture. And I think, because I think it's a true testament to the power of design, that you can actually put together all of the everyday ingredients of ordinary life to create something extraordinary.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. We don't have time to go through another project. I think the essence of that design you just mentioned is the social infrastructure. That doesn't matter what's the facade, what's the decoration. I want to read some questions. Please be honest. What's the ugliest building in New York City? Thank you.
The ugliest? That's interesting. It's funny. I'm drawing a blank here, but I think New York City has a fair share of ugly buildings. I think one of the worst buildings is Penn Station, right? And also because when you see the old photos of Penn Station was one of the most. It was like a Grand Central Station marvel of sort of aspirational civic architecture, and then it got converted into this dysfunctional, supposedly utilitarian, but really, really not very utilitarian piece of garbage.
Okay, yeah, it's. Would you participate in rebuilding cities in Ukraine? What's your vision of this process?
We would love to participate. Actually, one of my partners is married to a Ukrainian woman, and 2 weeks before the war, he drove down to get his mother-in-law out, and he's been living with his mother-in-law ever since. And I think for his sake alone, we would love to rebuild Ukraine. No, actually, he loves his mother-in-law, as we all do. But then the interesting part of the story is that 2 weeks after the war actually broke out, they went back to get her cat, which turned out to be a sort of Saving Private Ryan kind of level of mission. But and then actually another interesting story, like one of the members of parliament of Ukraine contacted me like a year or two later because he wanted to talk about making a national art museum in Kiev. And I was pretty amazed that was on his mind.
Right.
But then he quoted Churchill and said, if we give up on culture, then what are we fighting for, right? And I was like, well, absolutely, let's have the conversation. And then he said he wanted to come see us. And he said, we were on the phone, he said like, so I'm going back to the front now for 2 weeks, and then if I'm still here, then I'll come see you in December. And then so he ended up actually coming, he made it through the front line. So he came to our Christmas party in Copenhagen and stayed for the party, survived the party as well, and returned to the front line. So in that sense, I was quite blown away about how in the middle of everything that they were facing, that there was still this idea of a future and how the future could be better than now.
Yeah.
So yes. So I don't have any kind of specific visions for Ukraine, but I think Kiev is a gorgeous city. I was actually there. It's one of the most memorable moments in my life was right when we started big. We got commissioned to do a big project outside Kiev, never materialized. But I went there and I managed to organize a guided tour to the exclusion zone of Chernobyl. And this was 20 years after the meltdown. And I remember that we got sent home from school because Denmark was actually the first country that noticed the increased levels of radiation because of the Chernobyl meltdown. So it was something I remembered like clearly as a major thing. It was during the Cold War. Denmark doesn't have nuclear power, but the Swedes, the bastards, they built one of their nuclear power plants right next to the Copenhagen, like the Danish capital. So from my hometown, we could see the two silhouettes of the nuclear power plants in Sweden. Like, thank you, Sweden. So of course we thought it was the Swedes who had an incident, but it turned out it was in Ukraine. So I went there, and with the government permit, you could get a guided tour into the exclusion zone. You could only stay there for 8 hours because of the radiation levels, and you go to a city of 60,000 inhabitants that was evacuated in 3 days. And it looks like the kind of satellite, like in the town I grew up, there was like next to the public school, there was like a little neighborhood of high-rise apartments. The whole city is like that. So it looks somewhat familiar. It looks like a European satellite city. Mm-hmm. 60,000 inhabitants, that's like the 8th largest city in Denmark. And everything looks very familiar, except the trees are everywhere and a little bit too close to all the houses. Because when you stop mowing the lawn, or when you stop cutting the weeds coming out between the cracks in the sidewalk, then 20 years later, that's like a sizable tree, right? And it just made you understand that kind of the post-apocalyptic world doesn't look like Terminator. It looks like a forest. Mm. Because once we're not here, the forest just comes back and reclaims everything. So it was kind of strangely dystopian and strangely hopeful at the same time. And then the funny thing is, like, we walked around with a Geiger counter, And whenever you're walking on a pavement, you'll find the second you walk into the nature, that's where all of the particles end. The Geiger counter just went berserk. And you realize, okay, it may look nice, but we're not going to last long. And also as a result, at the time, bears and wolves and all the different endangered animals had come back to the exclusion zone. They were just not getting very old. But they were more successful there than in the presence of humans.
Wow. I think we really run out of time. But I think you end with your answer just covered a lot of things: nature, human, architecture, dystopian and hopeful, all the contradictory things. That's your specialty. You like hedonistic sustainability and pragmatic utopian. I think it's a beautiful ending that we embrace a lot of things that's maybe not conflictory. We applied some meaning to make it not working together, but I think you shared something really impactful for all of us. Thank you.